About a year and a half ago, I launched the series, and by extension the channel, with a look at a game called The Last Express. And it wasn't until 21 episodes later that I decided to implement some form of rating system via Wall of Worthiness. Now when I made the wall, I retroactively placed all the games that I reviewed before its introduction into the sections in which I felt I would have placed them had the wall existed from the start. Now, one of the games I placed in the Worth a Look section, which is for middle-of-the-road type games, was The Last Express. And really, that was only because my initial review, if you could call it that, was nothing more than me playing the game for an hour or so and going, yeah, the game's alright. And since then, I've been kind of wanting to revisit it and give it a better, more detailed review, especially now that I've more or less nailed the format of the showdown. This time, however, rather than the original version that I downloaded from GOG for the first video, we're going to be having a look at the Gold Edition available from Steam, since, supposedly anyway, it has some improvements over the original. Samina! Let's see if my opinion of the game will change for better or worse, or if I had it right from the start. Shubat Cinco! Now, I only played through the game one time for this review, and because of the real-time nature of The Last Express, it's a little difficult to give a full rundown of the story when there's potential plot details you could be missing. Now, even though I won't be giving a detailed story synopsis, there are still one or two points I want to make in regards to the story, including one about the ending, so there will still be a spoiler warning for those who want to skip this section. The story opens as your character, Robert Cath, boards the Orient Express at the invitation and request of his friend Tyler Whitney. Tyler has made some kind of remarkable discovery and trusts no one else with it but Cath. Cath, however, has had something of a questionable past and can't exactly board the train at the station with a bunch of police walking around. So, he hitches a lift and meets the train en route. Once on board, however, Cath finds that his friend has, shall we say, departed in more ways than one.
Tyler.
It's at this point that you do about the only responsible thing you can do in this situation. You dump your friend out the window and take his identity. A feat which is not as impossible as you might think.
Excuse me, can you tell me which compartment is Tyler Whitney's?
Oh, Monsieur Whitney, excuse me. Your compartment is number 1.
I'm sorry, are these people blind? There are only 3 conductors on this train. At least one of them has to have seen the real Tyler Whitney board the train, so you'd think they know what the actual guy looks like. But nope. Even before I found my dead friend and took his jacket to pretend I'm him, the conductors are already willing to do the pretending for me. Now that is the kind of service that kept the Orient Express running for so long. Anyway, once you have assumed Whitney's identity, it quickly becomes clear dear old Tyler was up to his neck in all sorts of dealings. It's up to you to sort through all the shady business and find out who killed Tyler whilst a plethora of political ploys are played out around you. The game takes place just before the outbreak of World War I, so although Cath's main goal is to find out who killed Tyler, a murder is by no means the only thing afoot aboard the Orient Express. It seems like just about every country that was involved in the war has a representative on board the train, from a German arms dealer to an Austrian spy who plays a mean violin, and of course you, an American ex-doctor. And if you think about it, there's an interesting parallel to be seen in the game's opening sequence. Think about World War I. An international conflict. Countries from all over the world fighting with each other for their own various reasons, which went on for some time, with America quite happy to remain neutral. They were only brought into the conflict later on after an attack on American ships by German U-boats. Now rewind a bit to the time frame in which The Last Express is set. Citizens from various nations, some involved in plots against each other, which have probably been set into motion long before they even got to the train. Now here comes an American late to the party who only gets involved in everything else after an attack on him in the form of his friend's murder. Again, I'm probably reading a little too much into symbolism that isn't there, but still, I thought it worth pointing out. About the only other thing I have to say about the story at this point is, as I mentioned before, the ending. Specifically how I wasn't able to see it, because I unknowingly got myself into an unwinnable situation. Here's Cath with an egg-shaped object called the Firebird. This is the remarkable discovery Tyler wanted to show you. When you first start the game and find Tyler's body, you also find a large chest in his compartment with an egg-shaped cavity, meaning not only was Tyler killed, the Firebird was stolen. Now by this point in the game, you'll have already found the Firebird and hidden it somewhere safe, but you've been forced by this man, a royal prince named Kronos, to retrieve it and open it. It works sort of like a puzzle box. You have to click certain gems on the egg in the right order. Once you do, the egg opens and transforms itself into a golden phoenix. It ain't called the Firebird for nothing. Kronos seems to think the Firebird has some hidden ability which is activated by the right sound, and so forces Anna, the Austrian violinist, to play a song which does... well, nothing, I think is the best way we can put it, so Kronos has you close it again. If you do, he takes the Firebird, leaves you alone, and you and Anna console each other before the train explodes and kills everyone for reasons we won't get into here. I'm trying not to spoil everything about the story. What's supposed to happen is this. When Kronos orders you to close the Firebird, you instead go into your inventory, grab this whistle, and blow it. This causes the Firebird to not only come alive, but to go batshit crazy, and it immediately attacks Kronos and his bodyguard. You just managed to notice the marks it leaves behind on Kronos and realize this was also how Tyler was killed before it turns on you and Anna jump out the window to safety. Now here was my unwinnable situation. When it came time for me to blow the whistle, I didn't have the whistle. Thus, I couldn't really do anything, and I just sort of helplessly stood there until Kronos shoots me and I get a game over. So why didn't I have the whistle? Well, first let's talk about how you get the whistle in the first place. One of the first things you'll probably notice when you board the train, well, apart from your dead friend and all that, is this little kid running up and down the sleeping cars blowing a golden whistle. If you're quick enough, you can click on him to stop him and ask him where he found it, but, annoying little brat that he is, he little more than says piss off it's mine before running off again. Later, you'll hear the boy complain to his mother about how he lost track of a beetle he caught. You can find this beetle in one of the dining cars, and if you click accurately enough, or if you're like me, luck out after left-click spamming, you'll catch the beetle and put him in a matchbox. If you then find the boy with the beetle in your possession, you'll show him the beetle, only to say, "Psych, it's mine now, bitch!" The kid walks off, I'm out of a whistle, and I think I'm right in saying I never saw him again before the end game. Now, I will readily admit this is my fault. Partially. After reading some walkthroughs after recording the game, I found I should have gone after the kid and showed him the beetle again, and then he would have given me the whistle. So yeah, that part's on me. Demo! Let's talk about some things here. Mainly, these two idiots. Kath knows this kid has a whistle and he would quite like to have it. This kid may be only 7 years old, but I'm fairly sure he's intelligent enough to recognize that this dude has something he really wants, the beetle. So why does Kath have to be such a dick about things? Why couldn't he offer to trade at that moment? Even if the kid didn't have the whistle on him and had to go and get the whistle, there's no reason an exchange of goods shouldn't have happened right there and then. But nope, the game wants the trade to happen on its terms. And it's because of that, and because of some questionable mechanics we'll get into later that meant I couldn't easily revisit this point in the game, that I was screwed out of the good ending. I'll credit the last Express with one thing. A luxury locomotive the Orient Express may have been, but there wasn't a hell of a lot of room on those cars, especially in the corridors of the sleeping cars. And that cramped feeling is carried across brilliantly by the game's graphics, both with the large black spaces on either side of each scene, and the detailed backgrounds based on photographs taken by the production team of an actual sleeping car similar to that used by the Express. The backgrounds weren't the only things designed to be period accurate either, so was the look of the characters. Live-action footage was recorded of each character. Then, through a bit of technical trickery, they were given a hand-drawn look, inspired by a popular art style of the time known as Art Nouveau. That said, however, the animation is for the most part very sparse, being limited to a scant few frames per scene. I can understand this being the case during actual gameplay sections. The pseudo-unpredictable nature of the game's real-time format means you likely won't be in the same spot at the same time in every playthrough, and I suppose it would be difficult to have a fully animated background scene going on in multiple spots which you may or may not walk in to see. But if you can see a fluid animation of someone walking down the corridor of a sleeping car during gameplay, then why couldn't the animation for the cutscenes be just as fluid? To me, having cutscenes limited to a small number of frames lessens the impact they otherwise could have had. The game's sound assets are decent for the most part, but there's a couple of spots where they could have used a little bit more work. Listen to this bit as Kath climbs up a ladder on the side of a passenger car to get to the roof. This is supposed to be a speeding train. Where's the wind, the sound of the wheels on the tracks, anything to convey the sense of danger here? The music for The Last Express is driven by violin, piano, or a combination thereof, generally accompanied by synthesized strings and percussion, which kind of stand out in each of the tracks, and not in the best way either. Which is not to say the music is bad. In and of itself, it's fairly enjoyable to listen to. In fact, I had some of the songs going in the background as I typed up this part of the script. I don't know, perhaps it's just jarring to hear quote-unquote modern instruments mixed into a game in which everything else seems to be so period accurate. In a fairly unique twist, The Last Express is played out in a sort of pseudo-real time. For every real-life minute that passes, about 6 in-game minutes tick by. Since this means you most likely won't see everything the game has to offer with a single playthrough, this gives it a good amount of varied replayability. You can even rewind to certain points in the journey in the menu, great for fixing any mistakes you've made. As handy as that sounds, however, that's only if you know exactly how far back to rewind. Plus, rather than just clicking to the exact point in your journey that you want to revert to, you can only rewind by clicking this back arrow. Each time you click, you have to wait for the clock to finish ticking back to the next point before you can click again, which doesn't always take the same amount of time, and you can't click and hold the arrow to make things easier either. Speaking of the menu, you have the ability to save your game, at least in the Gold Edition. I can't remember if that was a thing with the original or not. However, although you can have multiple game slots, each game is limited to only one save, and the only way to actually save the game is by exiting it, which just disrupts the flow of the game way more than necessary. The Last Express is a point-and-click adventure, so playing the game is really very simple. You'd think. The various cursor symbols themselves are straightforward enough. You have one for moving forward, turning left, right, or around, speaking, and using inventory. But I found the controls to be less than accurate during many points in the game. For example, if you happen to be next to a door when another character passes by, your cursor disappears momentarily, and you may even get turned around. There was even one point during my playthrough where, for whatever reason, the cursor was stuck on the symbol for turning left. The game still worked as it was supposed to, clicking to go forward still moved me forward, but I couldn't get the cursor back to normal without resetting the game. And maybe it's just me, but I could swear there was a bit of delay between my clicks and resulting action. For some puzzles in the game, you'll be required to carry something which will cause you to have your hands full, and you'll have to put this item down if you want to use something in your inventory or the environment. This is understandable in some cases, like, carrying your dead friend's corpse around, but why are my hands full if I'm carrying a briefcase or the Firebird egg? From a physical aspect, these should easily be carried with one hand, and even if they are heavy enough to require the use of both hands, you'd think you'd be able to free one hand long enough to do something like opening a door. Plus, in the Gold Edition, you have the added annoyance of having whatever heavy item you're carrying plastered on the screen while you're carrying it. Although it is mostly a first-person point-and-click, The Last Express also has the occasional third-person combat section, and I would appreciate the attempt to vary the gameplay more if the aforementioned control inaccuracies weren't also present in the combat sections. The way the combat generally works is thus. You face off against a single opponent. Every so often, they'll take a swing at you, which you're supposed to dodge by clicking at the right moment. Lather, rinse, repeat until eventually you get the chance to grab the weapon from your opponent's hand and end the fight. Now, when I say click at the right moment, I couldn't exactly tell you when that moment is, and to be honest, I don't think the game knows either. I usually tried clicking right when I saw the opponent begin his attack, and although I would click around the same time for each attack, sometimes it would work, sometimes I get a knife to the throat. Plus, each time you click, your cursor disappears for what seems like an eternity in these situations, though it's probably only for a second or two. Although sometimes that second or two is all it takes for my opponent to kill me, so I invariably resorted to just spam clicking. One of the improvements made to the game with the Gold Edition was the inclusion of a hint system. Just click this icon in the bottom left and you'll get a vague hint as to what to do next, with further clicks giving you a more specific hint. These hints tended to stick around even after I completed the objective they were referring to, though. And conversely, sometimes the hints would direct me to do something I wouldn't be able to do for a long while, like talk to someone who's in the middle of attending a concert, again making me wish for a way to fast forward time instead of just rewinding. I'll wrap this section up with some bugs and oddities I noticed. Firstly, we have this map. You have this map with you in your inventory from the start of the game. It's not that detailed, it just shows you which car of the train you're currently on, but later on in the game, about 2/3 of the way through, I happened to be looking in my inventory and I noticed the map was gone. Just disappeared. Couldn't tell you when, couldn't tell you why. As I said, the map wasn't that detailed, so it wasn't that big of a deal, just kind of strange. In the Gold Edition of the game, you have the ability to rewatch any video sequences you've hitherto unlocked. Be wary, however, of trying to watch these sequences and then going back into the menu. I did it once, and the game crashed. Lastly, as you play through the early part of the game, you will occasionally get these tutorial messages. Try not to click too fast when these pop up. I was trying to speed my way through the sleeping car at one point, rapidly clicking as I went along, and I accidentally started talking to the conductor at the same time the tutorial for the message icon came up. As a result, the tutorial message stayed up, and somehow I ended up at the map where you rewind the game with the message still on the screen, and I couldn't click out of it. I ended up having to Alt F4 my way out of the game. When I first found myself in the unwinnable situation I described earlier, my first instinct was to just toss the game in the worthless section and be done with it. But then, after a couple of days away from the game and a clearer head, I started to think about it a little bit more. If I were to sum up my current feelings on The Last Express in one sentence, it would be, it could have been handled a hell of a lot better. There's a multitude of issues with the game, and although some have to do with the supposedly improved Gold Edition, not all are specific to it. With better controls, better time mechanic, well, better everything, I probably wouldn't have minded going back in and trying to get the good ending, but as it was, I just really didn't see the point in putting myself through all that again. I suppose the game's pseudo-real-time nature and the resulting mix of possible playthroughs gives the game just enough to still be worth a look. Let it not be said my opinion of the game hasn't worsened since the first time I played it.